Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of Oak Forest Audio Reviews. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Hifiman Jade 2. This is the second time this headphone has been launched. The original Jade is a bit of a mystery. I know that there are units that exist. I've seen one, I heard it briefly, but they were not very consistent in terms of production quality and sound. So, for all intents and purposes, the Jade 2 will likely be the Jade that Hifiman will be known for, that will be remembered. Again, the first one was a bit of a mystery. Not a lot of information out there about them. Nonetheless, to start with, I want to thank the Hifiman team for allowing me the chance to hear this in my own home, on my own systems. Now, I have heard Jade 2 many times at a couple of different shows. Heard it twice at Axpona, I've heard it at some smaller events, and it's always kind of piqued my interest. Yes, there was the discussion of the build quality of the amplifier, and yes, it is worth mentioning the first Jade 2 unit that I got sent for review died. Namely, I had a lot of just high frequency noise on one of the channels. I believe it was the right channel. It was constant. Quiet, but constant, always there. Now, this was a review unit, so it had been shipped a couple of times, packaged, unpackaged, thrown in a lot of different systems. Who knows what abuse it went through. The second unit that I got from Hifiman, to my understanding, is new, and I had no problems with it whatsoever. I mention this because this is likely a system that you're going to want to purchase new and carry a warranty with. This is not something that I would necessarily feel comfortable recommending you get secondhand. Which leads into a discussion of the build quality of the headphone itself. It's kind of cheap. My favorite part about it are the cups. I don't know if you can, oh yeah. See that beautiful color? Oh man, it's like greenish purple. It's really, they call it the Jade, and that's actually, I think, the best way to describe the color of the driver. It is stunning. The gimbals themselves are kind of stiff. They're, I don't know, like a cheap plastic. The headband is a cheap plastic. The gimbals themselves are actually on a metal frame. The cables are non-removable, and they're kind of cheapy. The cups are plastic. The pads are actually kind of nice, and so is the headband. But it makes a lot of noise. It's very noisy. I don't always like creaking, noisy things. It just irks me. Nonetheless, Jade 2 is a system. Because I don't own any other electrostat amplifiers, I receive both the headphone amp for Jade 2 as well as the headphone. The system as a whole is $2,500. Now, for comparative purposes, I have the HD600, which is, of course, mine, my HD800, and then, interesting, a COS ESP95X collaboration with Drop, what used to be Mass Drop, electrostat system. So I really feel that these three headphones and sometimes the 600 are what really give the Jade 2 a run for its money. Where do we start out with in terms of performance, in terms of how does it sound? When I've heard it at shows, it's been in a noisy environment, and that's where I've liked it the most. When I get Jade 2 at home in my reference system and I listen in a room with 40 decibels of ambient noise, it sounds good for about 5 minutes, and then the more I listen, the more incorrect it sounds. What I like about Jade is it throws a lot of detail up front. Right? When you first hear it, it sounds really impressive. My problem is the more you listen, the more you notice is kind of incorrect. And the best way that I can contrast this is with HD800, except the difference, when you put on HD800, there's a lot of detail that's present in your face. There's a lot that's there. But the more you listen to HD800, the more you appreciate what's right. That's assuming that you like the tonal presentation. HD800 is a bit bright, and if you find that to be unnatural or fatiguing, you're never going to look past it. But on the flip side, there are two darker headphones we have. HD600 is not necessarily dark, but it does have a bit of upper mid emphasis. But the COS, the 95X, is quite dark in comparison to both the Jade, the Hifiman, and the HD600. What I liked about the 95X, this is a $500 electrostat system, is the tonal presentation. With 95X, when I put it on and I listen to it, I don't really notice much. Nothing stands out. But the more I listen to it, the more correct, the more I find. The more that I listen with 95X, the more detail that I notice, just the more impressed with it that I am. I had the opposite effect with Jade. The more I listened to Jade, the more that was incorrect. The more things would just kind of strike me as off. It just, I don't know, it just didn't sit well with me. A great example of this is going to be drums and guitars. I listened to a couple of tracks. I did some classical. I did a track by Beck, I'm Doing Fine. I believe it's the third track from the album Sea Change. And then I gave a listen to just a drum kit, a Chesky recording of a drum kit. And what I found is drums and strings, things that were focused in the, maybe it's the upper mid to top end, like low top end, didn't sound right. Stringed instruments, guitars sounded too quick. That is to say, the interaction of the pick with each individual string was emphasized, but the vibrato, the actual ringing out, like the harmonic tones of the strings themselves, were kind of muted. So when a guitar was strummed, it sounded rushed, like somebody was really strumming really fast, and they weren't really allowing the instrument to ring out. That's a way that you can play guitar. You know, I was a guitarist, I have classical guitars. There's a couple of ways you can play it. And I did not appreciate that Jade presented this sense of rush. It has this shout. That's a good way to describe it. The Jade 2 has a little bit of an upper mid shout that at first it's kind of impressive. That shout creates a nice sense of stage, but the more you listen to it, the harder it is to ignore, and the more you notice that it is not correct. It's not proper. Again, going back to drums, when I'm listening to drum kits, whether it's in a track or it's just a drum kit, the presentation is kind of all over the place. There are, like the toms seem a little bit de-emphasized, but the snares seem really forward. Sometimes the crash, the cymbals are really forward, and it's just the transition from, you know, the bass to low mids into the central and upper mids on into the top end is just not really to my liking with Jade. It feels uneven, so there's just this weird emphasis. It's kind of hit or miss, and things are presented in a very uneven fashion. I had a chance to listen to a track from The Goat Rodeo, which is a, well, female vocalist in this track, male vocalist, a piano, and I believe it's a cellist and a violist. And again, I noticed the problem with the upper mids. While the viola was really full-bodied, when I would listen with just the violin, it sounded rushed. It was just not quite right. You know, and it's weird because the low end with Jade is quite nice. I do feel the bass response with Jade, as well as the low and central mids, are quite appealing, quite natural. I really enjoyed it. I was impressed at just the solidity, the speed, the textures, the presentation of force when I listened with Jade. People online complain about it being kind of bass-light. I didn't find that to be the case. I found it to be absolutely just right. So while I had no problems with the bass, with how it presented low frequencies, my problems with Jade are from, central to upper mid-range and onward. Things did not sound natural. Technically speaking, I don't feel that Jade is on par with HD800 in my system in any case. Technically, I feel that Jade is better than the HD600 only in the bass. I feel the mid-range with HD600 is not only more natural, but sometimes more detailed. Both the Jade 2 and HD600 have just a bit of shout, but the way that the HD600, its shout is going to be upper mid emphasis, maybe a little emphasis in presence. The way that HD600 is slightly emphasized is not unnatural. It is noticeable if I'm listening for it, but again, it's not something that stands out at me as incorrect, right? Whereas with Jade 2, it's too much. There's too much emphasis, and you can't see that I'm smiling, but man, the 9.5X. Let's start by saying, technically speaking, in terms of detail and resolve, the Jade 2 is technically better than the 9.5X. But for a fifth of the price, because this is a $500 electrostat system that you can get for $400 sometimes. You can buy a $100 DAC and have a whole set. Anyways, that's the point. The tonal presentation with 9.5X is just so on point. Comparatively speaking, yes, the bass on Jade 2 is better. Definitely better than 9.5X. The resolve in the mid-range is sometimes better. When I'm listening to music, right, let's say a set of 5 tracks. 3 of those tracks, I would think that Jade was a bit better. 2 of the tracks, 9.5X was definitely better. And oftentimes there was kind of like a gray area, a single track that had the right mix of elements where some of the problems with Jade were more apparent. Now, what I really like and what gets me excited is, you know, the thing that people complain about with 9.5X is the amplifier, because it's just a little cost one. Jade is, of course, just a Stax unit, so you can plug it into a Stax amp. But not to diminish, but I mean, this was a $1,000 headphone when it was launched, and what the Massdrop team did was gave it better bass extension and filled a hole at 2K. And I can't say enough how to my ears how correct the 95X is, how tonally correct that it is. Yes, the bass does lack some dynamics and some details when compared to stuff like the Jade 2 and HD800. Yes, the top end on this is dark, but even though it's dark, even though the frequency response is slightly pulled back, slightly reserved, right? You could say the mid-range and upper mid-bass is forward comparative to the top end. It still doesn't sound dark. I can hear with my ears that it's not as forward, but the extension, there's just an evenness with 95X that makes things sound proper and correct. And the more I listened with 95X, the more it just agreed with me. It was pleasant to listen to. It's not the be-all, end-all in terms of resolve, but for an electrostat, if you're looking at Jade 2 for $2,500 or 95X for $500, I definitely think the Mass Drop X cost ESP 95X is a better electrostat to start with because it's an all-in-one system. Now, what I haven't talked about again is HD800. I mean, I do feel for my tastes in my system with my, very much customized single-end triode amplifier that I built kind of for HD800. I don't feel like any of the headphones that I have present really matched HD800 for my preferences. I will say, there are times when I notice that the mid-range and upper mids with 800 is recessed, only when I listen to 600 and ESP 95X. But comparatively speaking, I mean, the difference between the Jade 2 and the HD800 is kind of night and day. There is, I would say, equal, if not, simply better. The dynamic response in HD800 is better. A better presentation of quiet to loud and low frequencies, a better sense of slam and of impact. There were times that I felt that J2 was a bit loose. Yes, J2 is better than HD600, better than ESP 95X, but it does not compare with HD800. And this is, guys, I paid $1,600 for this new. I paid $500 for this after I bought it and modded it. $2,100 amplifier headphone versus the $2,500 amplifier headphone, and I really do think it's a night and day difference. The J2 just does not compete at its $2,500 price point. It's just not competitive. That said, guys, I am not going to recommend the J2 to anybody. I mean, I loved it at shows, and what I love, just when there's noise present, if I'm in my office and I have a fan on, like a fan blowing to keep me cool, I don't notice how shouty the J2 is, but there's other detail that I'm missing. So if you own a J2 and you want it to sound better, buy a box fan. Just kidding. But no, this was something that when you first hear it, it's impressive. But when you listen to it for longer periods of time, you notice how incorrect it is. And I do not like that. I do not like headphones or any product that is tuned that way to grab your attention. Because oftentimes if you add emphasis to draw attention to certain things, people who are wanting total resolve, those of us who are used to the sound of natural things, will notice that where there's emphasis, there's de-emphasis. So I don't like J2. I don't feel the presentation is natural. I don't feel that technically it's worthwhile. Again, I mean, even the volume knob is kind of loose if I was going to be fussy about it. Occasionally, I still get that weird noise just across the board. I don't find the J2 to be worth the $2,500 asking price. Maybe the headphone will sound better with other amplifiers. I've seen that online. But again, guys, J2 just does not get my recommendation. It just doesn't make the cut for me in terms of value and the price that they're asking for it. And given the problems I had with build on the previous model and literally workmanship, it died. I don't recommend buying the secondhand either. So thank you to the Hifiman team for allowing me the chance to be able to hear this headphone. I mean, the sheen is beautiful. It does live up to the name. That jade color is probably my favorite part about this headphone, is that beautiful coloration. Otherwise, again, thank you everybody for watching. Please leave your questions and comments in the comment section below, and check out the link in the description for a full written review of my blog. As always, guys, happy listening and have an awesome day, or an awesome evening. I don't know what time.